The satellite didn't explode. It didn't flare, didn't tumble, didn't even scream static. One frame it was there, blinking a friendly blue ID tag over the Atlantic. The next frame it was gone, like somebody erased it with a careful hand. In the control room, every screen kept running. That was the worst part. Nothing looked wrong until everything was. Admiral Catherine Holt watched the empty square where the civilian relay used to be and felt the air in the room tighten, as if the building itself had inhaled and decided not to exhale again. Operators leaned closer to their monitors. Nobody spoke, not because they were calm, because the absence of noise meant the enemy had been quiet enough to be confident. A young lieutenant cleared his throat, then thought better of it. He tried again. "Ma'am, we've lost Beacon 9. Holt didn't look away from the feed. "I know what we've lost," she said, voice flat. "Tell me what we've gained." The lieutenant blinked, searching. "We gained nothing, ma'am." Holt's mouth twitched in something that wasn't a smile. "Wrong. We gained a lesson." She tapped the screen with one finger. The last frame of Beacon 9's camera had caught a sliver of motion behind it. A shape that wasn't an asteroid and wasn't a shadow because shadows didn't curve like that. The object had slid past like a blade slipping into a sheath. "Play it again," Holt said. They replayed the last 2 seconds at half speed. The shape became clearer, and the room's temperature dropped by degrees that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Cruiser. Not human. Not anything in any archive. Smooth as poured metal, long as a city block, and moving like it didn't care about inertia. Holt rested her hands on the edge of the console. "They didn't shoot it," she said quietly. "They cut it." "Ma'am?" the lieutenant asked. Holt pointed at the feed. There was no debris field, no glittering junk cloud. The satellite was simply missing, cleanly removed from the equation. "That's not a weapons test," Holt said. "That's an opening sentence." The lieutenant swallowed. "Rules of engagement?" Holt turned her head just enough to look at him. Her eyes were dry, controlled, the color of old steel. "We don't have rules yet. We have restraint, and we have a planet full of civilians watching their sky turn into a courtroom." Another operator raised a shaky hand. "Ma'am, incoming transmission. Not on our standard bands. It's everywhere." The room went even stiller. Holt nodded once. "Patch it through. And record everything. I want the raw signal, not the polite version." The audio hit the speakers in a layered cascade, like a dozen languages trying to be heard at once. Then the noise folded into clarity. A translator had already adapted in real time. A voice filled the room. Calm. Old. Certain. It spoke like an official who had never been told no. "Attention, sole jurisdiction. This is the Galactic Council Compliance Fleet, acting under Article 12 of the Harmonized Safety Compact. Earth is hereby classified as a restricted world pending audit. Your orbital assets will be cataloged. Your weapons platforms will be suspended. Your governance structures will be verified." The word suspended landed like a hand on the throat. "Non-compliance will be corrected." The transmission ended. For a full heartbeat, no one moved. Holt let the silence sit there. It was useful. Silence was where decisions were born, not in speeches. Then she exhaled through her nose. "Well," she said, "that's the nicest ultimatum I've heard all week." A few people laughed. Not because it was funny, because their bodies needed to prove they still could. Holt pointed at the tactical display. "I want every orbit tracked. I want every launch window sealed. I want our birds hardened and our backups alive. And I want eyes on anything that isn't ours." "Ma'am," the lieutenant said, "they're inside the outer line. They crossed it before they announced." Holt nodded once. Of course they did. Bureaucrats hate waiting in line. Across the world, the same transmission was being played in living rooms and barracks and factories. It rolled across news networks, social feeds, emergency channels. People heard the words audit and restricted and corrected and tried to fit them into a human box. There wasn't one. On a coastal defense platform that smelled of salt and hot metal, Sergeant Jack Mercer listened with his helmet clipped to his belt and grease on his hands. He was perched beside a launcher that had been built in an era when people still believed that the biggest danger to Earth came from other humans. The launcher's paint was faded. The steel was reliable. His purpose had never changed. A private beside him stared up at the sky like it might sprout teeth. "Sergeant," the kid said, voice cracking. Are they taking over?" Mercer tightened the last bolt, then set the wrench down with a deliberate clink. He wiped his hands on a rag that had lived through wars the private had only read about. "They're trying," he said. The private swallowed. "What do we do?" Mercer looked at him. The kid's eyes were wide, too full of questions. Mercer remembered being that young once. Remembered the first time he realized the world didn't care how scared you were. "We do what we always do," Mercer said. "We check our gear. We follow orders. We keep people alive." The private nodded, but fear kept leaking out of him. "They sound official." Mercer snorted softly. "So did my divorce lawyer." The kid blinked, then a thin laugh escaped him like a cough. Mercer let it happen. Dark humor was a pressure valve. Better laughter than panic. A radio crackled. "All stations, this is Coastal Command. Condition amber. Repeat, condition amber. Secure civilians. Prepare for escalation." Mercer clipped his helmet on and pulled it over his head. The seal hissed. The world became filtered, distant, manageable. He tapped the side of his visor. "Copy," he said, because saying copy made fear smaller. The sun was bright and the ocean was indifferent. Above that, somewhere beyond the blue, a fleet had entered humanity's front yard and called it paperwork. In a hardened command center beneath reinforced concrete, General Elias Ward listened to briefings without changing his face. His staff spoke quickly. Tracks, signatures, probabilities, unknowns. One screen showed the council cruiser's silhouette. Another showed the missing satellite. Another showed public broadcast reactions rolling in like weather data. Ward's hands were folded on the table. Not clenched, not trembling, folded. "Sir," an aide said. The council message referenced an Article 12. "We don't have that in any treaty record." Ward's gaze stayed on the fleet marker. "We're not part of their treaty record," he said. "Sir, should we respond diplomatically?" someone asked. "If we engage too quickly." Ward raised one hand, not sharp, just enough to stop the flow. "They already engaged," he said. "They destroyed a civilian asset." "It may have been a demonstration," another officer offered, cautious. "To get attention." Ward's eyes shifted to that officer. The look wasn't anger. It was colder than that. "I'm aware," he said. "It got attention." A communications specialist leaned forward. "We can open a channel through their translator system. Ambassador Cade is standing by." Ward nodded. "Patch her in." The screen flickered. Ambassador Mara Cade appeared, framed by the flags of a world that had never agreed on anything until this moment. She had dark hair pulled tight, eyes that looked like they had already calculated the cost of every option. Her mouth was set in a line that didn't ask permission. "General," she said. "Ambassador," Ward replied. "You heard it." "I did," Cade said. "They're not asking. They're issuing." Ward gave a slight tilt of his head. "What's your read?" Cade's gaze did not waver. "They believe legitimacy is a weapon. They want us to fight the paper while they move the fleet." Ward's mouth tightened, almost approval. "And if we sign nothing? Then they'll declare us unlawful," Cade said. "They'll claim any response from us is aggression. They'll use our reaction to justify whatever they already planned." Ward looked down at his notes, though he didn't need them. "So this is law dressed up as a gun." Cade exhaled once, controlled. "It's conquest with a stamp." Ward looked up. "Then we do what we do with anyone who points a gun at us." Cade waited. She knew the weight of what came next. "We warn them," she said softly. Ward nodded. "Once." Across the Earth Defense Network, Admiral Holt received the directive. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need the comfort of conversation. She turned to her comms officer. "Get me a clean line," she said. "I want it recorded. I want it translated. and I want it delivered to every chamber that matters." "Ma'am," the officer said. "What about language tone?" "Diplomacy suggests." Holt cut him off with a glance. "Diplomacy suggests you don't let strangers rearrange your living room while telling you it's for your safety." The officer nodded and got to work. In a quiet room built for decisions, Ward stood in front of a camera. No medals, no slogans, no flag behind him, just a man in uniform with tired eyes and a world behind those eyes. He spoke as if he were reading weather conditions, because hysteria was contagious and he refused to spread it. "We recognize your fleet," Ward said. "We recognize your authority over your own worlds. We do not recognize your authority over ours." Somewhere in the council's distant capital, translators grabbed his words and poured them into alien ears. "This is your only warning," Ward continued. "Leave our solar system. Do not return." His voice did not rise. "If you remain, you will be treated as a hostile force, and we will respond with total finality." He paused. "Not for drama, for precision, like a marksman settling breath. We advise you not to test what humans consider mercy." The transmission ended. In Holt's control room, nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. Holt watched the feed and waited for the response the way you wait for a door to open in the dark, unsure whether you'll find a friend or a blade. The reply came quickly, broadcast back with polished confidence. A different voice now, sharper, amused. "Counselor Vale-Saran. Earth." The translator rendered. "Your warning has been acknowledged and filed. Your emotional volatility is noted. Compliance will proceed as scheduled." Holt let a small, humorless breath escape her. "Filed," she repeated. The lieutenant beside her whispered, "They're mocking us." Holt nodded. "Yes," she said. "And they're moving." The tactical display updated. The compliance fleet's formation shifted, subtle at first, then undeniable. It angled inward. It closed distance like a legal claim tightening around a throat. Holt turned to her staff, voice steady. "Condition red staging," she ordered. "Open the black packages. Tell procurement we're about to justify every line item they ever argued over." Someone asked, "Ma'am, are we really going to fire first?" Holt looked at the empty square where Beacon 9 used to be. Her expression didn't change, but the room felt her decision land. "We're not firing first," she said. "We're firing second." They just did it quietly enough that people called it paperwork. Down on the coastal platform, Mercer watched the sky and felt the world shift under his boots like a train starting to move. His radio hissed with new orders. Condition red. Defensive sectors. Civilian evacuation routes. The private beside him swallowed hard. "Sergeant," he said, voice small, "do you think they'll stop?" Mercer stared at the horizon where ocean met sky and imagined a fleet beyond it. Confident, clean, righteous. He tightened his grip on his rifle. "No," he said, "but that's fine." The private stared. "That's fine." Mercer's voice dropped into that tone veterans used when they were trying to keep the fear from spreading. "We gave them one warning," he said. "Now we do the part where they learn what it meant." Above them, unseen, the countdown began. The first compliance strike didn't come with sirens. Came with paperwork. At 4:12 Universal Time Coordinated, every major network on Earth received a cleanly formatted notice stamped with a symbol that looked like a judge's seal and a predator's eye at the same time. The translation was flawless. The tone was almost kind. Notice of temporary suspension of hazardous assets. By order of the Galactic Council Compliance Fleet. Then, as if to underline the word temporary, the sky lit up. Admiral Holt watched the tactical plot as 4 points of light peeled off the council formation and slid into low orbit with the casual confidence of people walking into a room they already owned. No ballistic arcs. No heat plumes. Just controlled descent like gravity had agreed to cooperate. Her operations officer spoke without looking away from his board. "They're lining up on non-population targets. Symbols," Holt said. "They're hitting our ability to build and talk. They want us deaf, blind, and ashamed." On the main screen, a shipyard on the Indian Ocean glowed white for a fraction of a second. then collapsed in on itself like a steel lung punctured from the inside. There was no cinematic fireball. The cranes simply bent and fell. The dry docks buckled. 1,000 tons of infrastructure sagged into ruin with an awful slow-motion inevitability that made it harder to breathe. A second strike took the anchor station of the Pacific Space Elevator. The upper cable didn't snap like a rope. It disintegrated in a thin line, a surgical cut that left the remaining structure hanging for one impossible moment before the weight of it remembered physics and tore itself apart. The third hit a deep-range radar installation in northern Canada. The snow didn't melt. It flashed into vapor and then fell back down as a drifting ash that looked like gray weather. The fourth target was a data relay hub in the South Atlantic. The ocean didn't boil. It rippled, and then the entire region went dead on the map, as if somebody had turned off a lamp. Holt kept her hands clasped behind her back. She could feel her knuckles wanting to tighten. She refused to give the enemy that satisfaction even in private. Her aide's voice was thin. "Casualties are coming in. Keep them off the main feed for now," Holt said. "The public gets facts, not panic." A comms tech glanced up. "They're broadcasting again. Same translator. Same stamp." The alien voice returned, steady, official, and strangely pleased with itself. "This is mercy. Submit and you will live. Your hazardous assets are being neutralized for the safety of the wider galaxy. Cooperation will be rewarded. Resistance will be corrected." Holt looked at the room, at the people swallowing fear like dry bread. She spoke softly, not for drama, but because quiet made people listen. "They just shot us in the mouth," she said, "and called it dental care." A few tight laughs escaped. Someone exhaled too hard. The pressure bled, just enough. A lieutenant leaned in. "Ma'am, General Ward requests options for a proportional response." Holt's eyes flicked to the fleet diagram. "Proportional," she repeated. "Sure. We'll give them proportional." She turned to the weapons director. "Deploy package Black 1. The director hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Black 1 is live. Somewhere above Earth, far enough away to be unseen. A small object drifted free from a human platform that had been quietly launched months ago under the label of debris mitigation research. It had no transponder, no reflective paint, no friendly beacon. It wore black like a confession. Tiny cold thrusters breathed once, so faint that the heat signature barely rose above background radiation. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. It simply moved into the space a Council escort ship would occupy if the Council escort ship kept doing what it was doing, because humans had always been good at predicting arrogance. On the Council escort's bridge, the crew read sensor reports with growing irritation. Their systems were designed to detect threats the galaxy respected. Bright weapons, charged particles, energy spikes, emissions that announced intent. Their tactical screens were calm. Then the escort ship ceased to exist in a way that made the universe feel unfair. There was a brief flash, not of light but of absence, as if the stars behind it blinked. The ship's forward third became vapor and shards. The rest spun, open like a flower made of metal, and then stopped being a ship. No warning, no communication, no negotiation, just mass and velocity finishing an argument. On Earth, Holt watched the escort's marker vanish from the plot. Her aide whispered, "No one saw it." Holt didn't smile. "Good," she said. "Neither did they." In the Council's command network, confusion spread like a spilled chemical. Calls overlapped. Demands for explanation. Accusations of malfunction. They did not understand how something could kill them without announcing itself. Holt leaned toward her comm station. "Send nothing," she ordered. "Let them sit with it." A junior officer shifted nervously. "Ma'am, isn't silence provocative?" Holt's gaze cut to him. "Silence is educational. They're here to teach us compliance. We're returning the favor." Down on the ground, Sergeant Mercer didn't have the luxury of admiring orbital chess. He was in a municipal operations building that had been retrofitted into a command node, the kind of ugly concrete box nobody cared about until it mattered. The building's basement smelled like old dust and new fear. Wires ran along walls like veins. A generator thumped somewhere behind a door marked authorized personnel only, as if a sign could stop anything. Mercer's squad moved with the practiced economy of people who had learned that hesitation got you killed. He watched a private tug at his own vest straps for the third time. "Stop fidgeting," Mercer said. "If your gear is loose, you'll die. If your gear is tight, you'll still die, but at least you'll look professional." The kid tried to laugh. Came out wrong. A voice crackled over the radio. "Contact expected within 15. Unknown numbers. High-tech. Rules are defense, no pursuit." Mercer clicked his mic. "Copy." He turned to his demolition specialist, a woman with calm eyes and a scar that ran like a thin white border along her jaw. "Charges. Set," she said. "Stairwell collapses. Hallway pinch. Exterior access points wired." Mercer nodded. "We're not here to win a parade. We're here to make the building unappealing." A younger soldier asked, "Sergeant, are we allowed to blow our own building?" Mercer looked at him as if he'd asked whether fire was hot. "Son, we're allowed to do whatever keeps aliens out of our command network," he said. "This is not a museum." Above them, the city was trying to pretend the day was normal. People still drove. Lights still changed. A few brave idiots filmed the sky for views. But every street felt like it was waiting for something to step out of the air. It did. The first compliance Marines came down in pods that didn't burn. They whispered into the atmosphere like guilt. The pods opened with a soft hiss. The aliens stepped out in armor that looked grown rather than built, pale and smooth with dark seams that pulsed faintly, as if the suits were alive. They moved in formation that was too clean, too orderly, like they believed chaos was something only lesser species suffered from. Mercer watched them through a cracked window on the second floor, rifle braced, breath controlled. "They walk like they've never tripped," he murmured. His scarred specialist muttered back, "Let's fix that." The first human shots did not aim for bodies. They aimed for joints, for seams, for visors, not because humans were merciful, because they were practical. A compliance Marine lifted an arm, and a shimmering field rippled into existence, catching bullets like rain. Another raised a device and sent a pulse down the street that made car alarms sing. Mercer's squad fell back as trained, drawing the aliens into the building like fishermen drawing a line. The first alien crossed the threshold. The floor panel beneath it gave way with a controlled detonation. The creature dropped a full story into a pit that had been waiting, and the field around it flickered and failed as it hit a nest of metal spikes and conductor wire. Mercer didn't cheer. He counted. 1. The next alien stepped forward, cautious now. It scanned. It saw nothing because the traps were not fancy. They were dumb and brutal and built by hands that had learned in other wars that simple worked when complicated failed. The aliens pushed inward anyway. Compliance doctrine did not include retreat. Mercer's squad fired again, then fell back again, guiding them into choke points, collapsing stairs behind them, sealing doors, turning the building into a maze that punished confidence. In the middle of it, Mercer found time for one dry line into his mic. "If anybody asks," he said, "we are experiencing a very aggressive audit." A few laughs crackled back, thin but real. Then the feed changed. Every screen in the building, every phone in the city, every broadcast channel the council could hijack, flickered into a live image. A group of civilians in a plaza, hands bound, faces pale. Compliance Marines stood behind them like statues. Counselor Valsaran's voice slid in like a blade. "Observe." The translator rendered. "Resistance creates disorder. Disorder must be corrected." A civilian tried to speak. A woman, hair tangled, eyes wide. The audio cut her off. A pulse weapon fired. Not loud, not dramatic. The civilian dropped as if her strings had been cut. A second pulse. Another body. There was no rage on the Marines' faces. They were doing a job. That was the horror. It was policy, executed with calm professionalism. In the basement, someone made a sound that wasn't a sob but wanted to be. Mercer felt his stomach go cold. He had seen death. He had caused it. But this was different. This was murder framed as instruction. The private beside him whispered, "Sergeant, what do we do?" Mercer's jaw worked once. He didn't trust his voice, so he kept it simple. "We keep them out," he said. "We keep our people alive. And we remember this." In the command center underground, General Ward watched the same broadcast without blinking. His staff waited, expecting fury. A slammed fist, a shouted order. Ward's response was quieter than anger. It was worse. He turned to his aide. "Any further diplomatic outreach?" he asked. The aide hesitated. They've refused to acknowledge our warning as binding." Ward nodded slowly, as if confirming a calculation. "Then there is no misunderstanding," he said. Admiral Holt's voice came through the secure line. "General, I have escalation options." Ward's eyes stayed on the screen where the plaza was now empty except for the stains. "Proceed," he said. Holt didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need permission spelled out. "Copy," she replied. On Mercer's floor, the compliance Marines advanced again, their confidence sharpened by their own cruelty. One of them turned its helmeted head toward the building's camera, as if aware it was being watched, as if daring humans to respond. Mercer raised his rifle. His hands were steady. He spoke to his squad without looking at them. "No hero stuff," he said. "No speeches. We move like we trained. We do the work." The scarred specialist nodded once, eyes bright with something that wasn't tears. "Work," she echoed. Outside the building, the air trembled as another council craft moved overhead. It wasn't a strike craft. It was larger, slower, with a belly full of instruments. It hovered like a verdict. In orbit, sensors picked up a change in the council formation. Ships shifted positions around a central vessel whose core began to glow in wavelengths that made human instruments complain and spike. A tech in Holt's command room swallowed hard. "Ma'am, they're charging something. It's not weapons fire. It's a system." Holt leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Name it." The tech's voice almost broke. "Their internal comms refer to it as a sanitation device." Holt felt the word crawl up her spine. Sanitation. A clean word for a dirty act. She opened a secure channel to Ward. "General," she said, "they're preparing something. They're calling it sanitation." On the other end, Ward's voice stayed flat. "Estimated time?" he asked. "Unknown," Holt replied. "But their formation is protecting it. They're expecting us to hit it." Ward didn't answer immediately. In the pause, Mercer's building shook as a compliance Marine fired a pulse weapon that blew a door off its hinges. Smoke rolled down the hallway like a living thing. Then Ward spoke, quiet and final. "Then we hit everything else first," he said. "And we do it fast." Holt's mouth tightened. "Understood." Mercer heard none of that. He heard only the pounding of alien boots on concrete and the thin, terrified breathing of the kid behind him. He snapped his fingers once, sharp. "Eyes up," he said. "They're coming." And above them, in the black where treaties meant nothing and physics meant everything, the Council's central vessel continued to charge its cleanly named weapon, as if the galaxy itself was being prepared to be wiped down. Earth stopped arguing the way a man stops talking when he hears a gun slide out of a holster. The change wasn't announced. It wasn't voted on. It didn't need permission. It moved through the world like cold weather, quiet, inevitable, everywhere at once. Factories that had spent years making cars and kitchen appliances began producing armor plates and power couplings. Shipping containers filled with consumer goods were stripped and refilled with rations, medical kits, and spare parts. Rail lines that had once carried tourists and coal started running day and night under blackout orders, their schedules guarded like nuclear codes. Old bunkers were opened by hands that hadn't touched those locks since the last century. Mothballed ships were dragged from their watery graves and made useful again. Sergeant Mercer watched the mobilization from a shattered window of the municipal building that had become his squad's tomb and fortress. Smoke drifted through the corridors in lazy sheets. The walls were scarred with impact marks and melted seams. Somewhere down the hall, an alien pulse weapon kept trying to convince the building to surrender. Mercer's team was smaller now. 2 were dead. One had been dragged away by medics with a tourniquet so tight it made the skin purple. The private who'd asked if the aliens would stop was still alive, but his eyes were older. Mercer checked his magazine, felt the familiar weight of it, and clicked it back in. The motion was automatic, comforting in the way a ritual is comforting. You do the steps because you know the steps. You do the steps because the alternative is thinking. The scarred demolition specialist, Corporal Sato, leaned against a cracked support beam, breathing through a cut lip. "They're still outside the stairwell," she said. "They'll come again," Mercer replied. Sato spat a line of blood onto the concrete. "Good." The private blinked. "Good." Sato's eyes stayed fixed on the hallway. "They keep coming," she said. "That means they still think we're worth taking." Mercer almost laughed. It wasn't joy. It was the dry humor you get when the world turns absurd. "Yeah," he said. "We're a premium subscription." Outside, the city's emergency broadcasts had shifted from "remain calm" to "follow instructions." People moved with the stunned obedience of those who'd watched the council execute civilians on camera and realized the universe was not interested in their innocence. In the deep command center, General Elias Ward listened to the reports without flinching. He had slept in 30-minute segments since the compliance strike began. His coffee had gone cold twice and he drank it anyway. He didn't look heroic. He looked like a man doing math with lives. "Orbital disruption continues," a briefer said. "We've regained partial comms through hardened channels. Public networks are unstable." Ward nodded once. "Civilian evacuation corridors?" "Moving," the briefer answered. "Compliance Marines are attempting to seize municipal command nodes. Resistance is holding in several sectors." Ward's eyes shifted to a screen showing the council's central vessel, the one charging the sanitation device. The glow was brighter now, bleeding into bands of radiation that made human sensors squeal. Admiral Holt's face appeared on another screen, her posture rigid, her expression composed enough to be insulting to fear. "General," Holt said, "we can hit their central vessel, but they've built a protective lattice around it. If we commit everything, we might crack it. If we miss, we lose our fleet and still die." Ward studied the plot. The council had moved like a machine, efficient, legalistic, confident. Their doctrine was built on one assumption: resistance would fold once the price was made clear. Humans had a different assumption. Humans assumed the price would be paid. Ward's voice was calm. "We won't punch through their shield with one blow," he said. "We'll pull the shield apart." Holt's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're thinking layered strike." Ward nodded. "Operation Soul Warning." The name hung in the room like a prayer that had been sharpened into a knife. Ambassador Mara Cade stood behind Ward's chair, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. She'd been on calls with council intermediaries for hours, hearing their smooth language, their polite contempt. She'd watched them turn murder into procedure. "Once we start," she said quietly, "there's no return." Ward didn't look at her. "They crossed that line when they killed civilians on camera," he said. "We're just catching up." Holt's mouth twitched. "Finally," she said. "I hate being behind schedule." Ward turned to the operations table. "Layer 1, he said. "Poison their senses." A cyber warfare officer leaned forward. "We can't breach their core systems. Their encryption is alien." Ward's eyes were steady. "Then don't hack their machines," he said. "Hack their expectations." The officer swallowed, then nodded. "Understood." Within minutes, Earth's signal teams began feeding the council fleet a story. Not a lie so obvious it would be rejected. A lie built from truths arranged in the wrong order. A distress call from a human carrier that didn't exist. A civilian convoy transmitting a panic beacon that was actually a hardened military relay. A phantom heat signature drifting toward the council's flank like a wounded animal. False trajectories. Ghost echoes. Dead satellites suddenly coming back online with impossible telemetry. The council sensors, designed to interpret the galaxy through their doctrine, began to see threats where there were none. Their fleet shifted. Defensive arcs rotated. Escort ships moved to protect empty space. Holt watched the changes with a predator's patience. "They're reacting," she murmured. "Good." Ward's voice was still even. "Layer 2, he said. Kinetics." On a dozen platforms scattered across Earth's hidden orbital infrastructure, old launch systems that had been dismissed as obsolete woke up. They did not glow. They did not roar. They simply pushed mass into trajectories that would intersect with Council hulls at velocities that made armor irrelevant. Tungsten rods, carbon-coated projectiles, guided rocks, things that did not announce themselves. Holt spoke to her weapons director. "No patterns," she said. "No symmetry. Make it look like chaos." The director nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The first impacts were not cinematic. They were terrifying in their simplicity. A Council destroyer lost its engine cluster as a tungsten rod punched through it and turned the interior into a spray of molten metal. Another ship's comm array vanished, leaving it deaf and blind. A third took a hit along its spine that didn't destroy it but bent it just enough to make every system scream. The Council fleet began firing plasma into the darkness, bright, furious beams that struck nothing. They were trying to kill the invisible. Holt's deadpan voice cut through Earth's comms. "They're shooting at ghosts," she said. "That's adorable." Ward's eyes stayed on the sanitation vessel. It still glowed, still charged, still waited behind its shield lattice. He didn't speak louder. He didn't need to. "Layer 3, he said. "Boarding." On a launch deck hidden inside a hardened orbital platform, Mercer's name appeared on a roster. He didn't see it. He was still in the building, still holding the line. But a drone feed from his helmet camera was streaming to command, and Ward watched it with the cold attention of a man selecting tools. "Sergeant Mercer," Ward said into the secure channel. "You're being reassigned." Mercer's voice crackled back, strained with smoke and distance. "Sir, we're kind of busy." Ward's tone didn't change. "I'm aware," he said. "You've done your job. Now you're going to do another one." There was a pause. Then Mercer's dry humor pushed through. "That's the nicest way anyone's ever told me my vacation got canceled." Ward didn't smile. "You'll board a Council vessel," he said. "You'll plant charges. You'll extract whatever intelligence you can. You'll disable it from the inside." Mercer's breathing was audible in the channel. He knew what boarding meant. Close quarters. Unknown layout. Alien weapons. No guarantee of return. "Copy," Mercer said finally. The word sounded heavier than before. Hours later, Mercer stood in a cramped staging bay wearing a suit that smelled like oil and fresh polymer. His squad was rebuilt from survivors, veterans, engineers, people who had seen enough to stop believing in luck. Sato was with him, jaw bandaged, eyes sharp. A young officer briefed them quickly. "Council ships are sterile. No windows. Minimal cover. Their internal security is automated and their Marines respond fast." Mercer checked the clamps on his rifle. "So," he said, "it's like breaking into a bank, except the bank shoots back." No one laughed. Then Sato did once a short bark. The sound was a knife in the gloom. It reminded them they were still human. Their insertion craft moved toward a crippled Council ship that had lost comms and drifted behind the fleet's protective lattice. It was damaged but not dead. That made it dangerous. As the craft latched onto the alien hull, Mercer felt the vibration in his bones. The metal beneath them was smooth, cold, wrong. It didn't feel built. It felt grown. The breach charge cut through with a sound like tearing fabric. The hatch fell inward. Inside, the corridor was pale and clean, lit with soft white panels that made the human suits look dirty by comparison. The air smelled faintly sweet, like antiseptic. Mercer stepped through first. His boots made a dull thud. The sound felt loud in the sterile silence. Sato followed, weapon raised. "Feels like a hospital," she muttered. Mercer's voice was low. "Hospitals are where people go to bleed politely." They moved deeper. The ship's interior was too orderly, too calm, as if it believed chaos could be scrubbed away. Walls curved smoothly. No corners. No shadows. No hiding places except the ones you made. They found the first dead alien in a hallway, pinned against the wall by a jagged shard of its own hull. Its armor was intact, but something inside it had been turned into soup by kinetic impact. Mercer stared at it for half a second. No triumph, just acknowledgement. Then he moved on. They reached a chamber carved with symbols. At first Mercer thought it was decoration. Then his translator overlay rendered the words. Mercy is obedience. The phrase was etched into the wall like scripture. Sato's breath hissed. That's what they call it. Mercer's voice was flat. That's what they sell it as. He keyed his mic command. We found doctrine carved into the hull. They're not just military. They're religious about it. Ward's voice came back. Copy. Proceed. They pushed toward the ship's core. Automated turrets unfolded from the ceiling like insects. Mercer's squad moved with practiced brutality, firing at joints, using smoke, using flash bursts, using the same dirty tricks humans had used against humans for centuries. One of Mercer's men took a hit to the shoulder. He didn't scream. He grunted, shoved himself behind cover, and kept firing. Sato crawled to him, slapped a sealant patch over the wound, and muttered, "Don't die. I already hate paperwork." Mercer's mouth twitched. Same. They reached the data vault behind a sealed door that didn't have a handle. It read their presence, judged them, and refused them. Mercer planted a charge. "We don't ask doors," he said. The blast was contained, surgical. The door folded inward. Inside, the vault was colder. The air tasted metallic. Rows of crystalline storage columns pulsed with faint light. Mercer's tech specialist moved in, hands shaking slightly as he connected an extraction rig. "We've got data," he whispered. "Lots of it. Pull anything labeled sanitation," Mercer said. The specialist's eyes widened as the translator overlay spat out words that made the room feel smaller. Sanitation clause. Authorized biosphere sterilization for non-compliant restricted worlds. Mercer stared. "Say that again." The specialist swallowed. "It's legal authority to erase a planet," he said. "Not as punishment. As procedure." Sato's jaw tightened. "They're going to clean us," she said, voice rough. "Like we're dirt." Mercer felt something inside him go cold and heavy. He had known the council was willing to kill. He hadn't known they were willing to call it maintenance. His radio crackled. Ward's voice came through, calm as a gravestone. "Confirm," Ward said. Mercer forced his voice steady. "Confirmed," he replied. "They have a sterilization policy. They call it sanitation. They're charging a device to do it." There was a pause. In that pause, Mercer heard distant footsteps. "Alien. Fast. Coming." Ward's voice returned. "Extract now," he ordered. Mercer looked at the vault, at the clean walls, at the doctrine carved into metal. Mercy is obedience. He keyed his mic. "We're leaving a message," he said. Sato already had explosives out, hands moving with lethal familiarity. "Good," she murmured. They planted charges along the vault's support columns. Not enough to destroy the ship. Enough to ruin the thing it valued, order. As they retreated back toward the breach point, Council Marines poured into the corridor, armor gleaming, weapons humming. They moved like they believed the universe owed them victory. Mercer's squad fought them in tight spaces, muzzle flashes strobing against white walls. Human rounds sparked. Alien fields shimmered. Bodies fell. Blood, human and alien, stained the sterile floor like an insult. A Marine lunged at Mercer with a blade of light. Mercer sidestepped and drove a combat knife into the seam beneath its arm. The alien convulsed, field flickering, and dropped. Mercer didn't watch it die. He kept moving. They reached the breach point with seconds to spare. One of Mercer's men, Corporal Rains, was limping, his leg leaking dark blood into his boot. Mercer grabbed him. "Move," he snarled. Rains shook his head once. "Can't," he gasped. "Too slow." Mercer's throat tightened. "No," he said. "Not today." Rains shoved a detonator into Mercer's hand. His eyes were clear. Too clear. "Do it," he said. "They don't get this ship back." Mercer's jaw clenched hard enough to ache. He wanted to argue. He wanted to refuse. But war didn't care what you wanted. He nodded once. Copy, he whispered. Rains smiled, small and grim. Tell my wife, he said. I finally got to break something expensive. Mercer pulled back into the insertion craft. The hatch sealed. The clamps released. As the craft pushed away, Mercer watched through the small viewport as Rains turned back toward the corridor, rifle raised, alone in a white hallway that was about to become a grave. Mercer pressed the detonator. The Council ship didn't explode outward, collapsed inward. The vault section imploded, shredding data columns, cracking structural supports, turning the sterile order into chaos. Mercer's craft shuddered as shockwaves rolled through space like invisible thunder. Back in command, Holt watched the telemetry and whispered, "That's one." Ward's eyes stayed on the sanitation vessel. Its glow had reached a steady, terrible brightness. The countdown was no longer theoretical. Kate stood behind him, face pale. "If they fire it," she said, "there won't be survivors to remember." Ward's voice was low. "Then we stop it," he said. Holt's comm line opened. "General," she said, "I have an option." Ward didn't look at her. "Say it." Holt swallowed once. Even she hesitated, and that made the room feel colder. "We captured a Council drive core," she said. "If we detonate it inside their formation, it won't be a bomb. It'll be a collapse. A physics event." Ward's eyes narrowed. He understood immediately. It would work. It would also change everything. Cade's voice was barely audible. "That would be catastrophic." Holt's tone was deadpan, but her eyes were haunted. "Yes," she said. "That's the point." Ward stared at the glowing sanitation vessel, at the clean word for the dirtiest act imaginable. He thought of the civilians executed in the plaza. Thought of Beacon 9 disappearing without sound. Thought of Rains standing alone in a corridor so Earth could breathe a little longer. Then he spoke, and the room felt the weight of it like a hand on the chest. "Authorize it," Ward said. Holt closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, they were steady. "Copy," she replied, and far above Earth, the galaxy's idea of mercy began to break. The drive core sat inside its containment cradle like a sleeping god. It wasn't supposed to exist in human hands. It was a piece of Council engineering torn out of a crippled ship and dragged into a hardened orbital platform by people who worked with gloves and prayer. It pulsed faintly, a heart that didn't beat so much as threaten. Every sensor around it screamed in quiet numbers. Every technician who walked past it walked faster. Admiral Catherine Holt stood on the platform's command deck with her arms folded, staring at the containment field. The light from the core painted her face in pale bands, making her look older than her years. Her weapons director approached, voice low. "Ma'am, we can still choose a different option." Holt didn't turn. "There isn't a different option," she said. "Ma'am, if we do this, we might rupture the whole battle space." Holt finally looked at him. Her expression was calm, but there was something behind her eyes that made the air feel thin. "If we don't do this," she said, "we won't have a battle space. We'll have a grave." On a separate screen, the sanitation vessel glowed brighter than any star in the tactical view. It sat behind a lattice of escorts, protected by doctrine and arrogance. Its charge curve was climbing toward completion. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to the sky becoming fire. General Ward's voice came over the secure channel, steady as stone. "Status?" he asked. Holt's reply was immediate. "Drive core is staged," she said. "Delivery vector is set. We have one shot." Ward didn't speak for a moment. Holt could hear the background noise of his command center. Muted voices, clipped reports, the constant hum of a world holding its breath. Then Ward said, "Proceed." Holt swallowed once. It wasn't fear of death. It was fear of becoming something that didn't care about death anymore. "Copy," she said. The delivery craft was not a missile. It wasn't sleek or heroic. It was a blunt instrument wrapped in insulation and bad intentions, designed to move a nightmare from one place to another. It drifted away from the platform on cold thrusters, invisible to most sensors, because humans had learned long ago that survival favored the quiet. Holt watched the craft's marker slide across the plot toward the council formation. "Keep it cold," she ordered. "No emissions. No chatter. No prayers on open comms." A junior officer's hands trembled over his console. "Ma'am, what if they detect it?" Holt's voice was dry enough to sand metal. "Then we die early," she said. "Try not to make it awkward." In the council fleet, the escorts rotated slowly, their shields flaring in gentle pulses like a heartbeat. They were confident. They believed the humans had spent their last trick on stealth rocks and boarding raids. They believed humans would run out of courage before the council ran out of authority. They didn't understand that humans didn't run on courage. Humans ran on spite and memory and the simple refusal to die politely. The delivery craft slipped into the outer edge of the escort lattice. It moved like a shadow through a room full of people who refused to admit shadows existed. The council sensors were tuned for bright threats. The craft was dim. The craft was patient. Then, just before it reached the sanitation vessel's protective ring, a council frigate shifted course unexpectedly, as if a ghost signature had tugged it the wrong way. The frigate's belly sensors caught a flicker. An alarm rippled through council channels. Holt saw the change in the plot. "They saw something," her aide whispered. Holt's jaw tightened. "Not enough," she said. "Not in time." The council frigate fired a plasma lance into the darkness. The beam cut a glowing scar across empty space. It missed by kilometers, but the act itself was a warning. The delivery craft did not accelerate. It did not panic. It continued forward because panic was a human luxury and machines didn't care. The sanitation vessel's core reached 97% charge. 98. 99. Ward's voice came through Holt's channel, quiet. "Time," he said. Holt's hand hovered over the trigger command. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. "Do it," Ward said. Holt pressed the command. The containment field dropped. For half a second, nothing happened. The drive core hung in the craft like a held breath. Then space around it folded wrong. It wasn't an explosion. It was a failure of reality. A collapse in the rules the council thought they owned. Gravity sheared sideways. Light bent. The stars behind the fleet warped into curved lines like scratches on glass. The council escort lattice broke apart as if a giant invisible hand had reached into the formation and squeezed. Ships didn't burn. They cracked. Hulls split along seams that had never been meant to experience that kind of stress. Shields flared and died like candles in a storm. Entire sections of vessels were pulled into nothingness and spat back out as shredded debris. The sanitation vessel's glow flickered. Its charge destabilized. Its protective field stuttered. Then the vessel's core went dark, not from mercy, but because the universe had stopped cooperating with its design. On Earth's command screens, half the council fleet vanished from the plot in a single horrifying cascade of red. The markers didn't blink out one by one. They died together, like a choir silenced mid-song. For a moment, no one in Holt's command room spoke. Not even the people who had begged for this option. Holt stared at the destruction and felt no triumph. Only a cold, heavy certainty that something inside humanity had shifted and would not shift back. Her aide whispered, "We did it." Holt's voice came out low. "Yes," she said. "We did." She looked at the tactical view. The sanitation vessel was crippled, drifting, its charge dead. Earth had survived. But the price was written in the broken shapes floating in orbit, and in the knowledge that the council would never forget what had been done to them. General Ward's voice cut through the silence. "Any surviving hostile vessels inside Seoul will be treated as active threats," he said. "No negotiation. No warning." Holt's weapons director hesitated. "Sir, they're retreating. Some of them are trying to pull back." Ward's tone did not change. "Track them," he said. "Do not pursue beyond the line." Holt turned sharply. "General," she said, "with respect, we can finish them. We can erase the rest of the fleet." Ward's answer came without anger, which made it more final. "No," he said. Holt's eyes narrowed. "Sir." Ward's voice stayed calm. "We don't need to erase them," he said. "We need them to remember." The words hung in the air like smoke. On a damaged council flagship, alarms screamed in alien tongues. The bridge was chaos, bodies thrown against consoles, screens flickering with warped star maps. The captain, an older being with pale ridges along its skull, clung to a rail as the ship shuddered. A subordinate shouted, translator struggling. "Captain, the sanitation vessel is offline. We cannot fire." The captain's breathing was harsh. "Then we retreat," it rasped. "We retreat now. But the humans, they will destroy us if we stay," the captain snapped. Their warning was not a threat. It was a procedure. The flagship's engines flared weakly as it turned away from Earth. It limped like a wounded animal trailing debris. In Holt's command room, a junior officer stared at the plot. "They're running," he said, disbelief and relief tangled together. Holt's gaze stayed on the retreating marker. "Let them," she said. "Ma'am," the officer asked, "shouldn't we send a message? Something diplomatic?" Holt's mouth twitched. "We already did," she said. "They filed it." Down on Earth, Sergeant Mercer sat on a curb outside a half-collapsed building that had once been a school. His helmet rested in his lap. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the delayed impact of everything he'd forced himself not to feel. The private sat beside him, staring at the empty playground where swing chains moved slightly in the wind. The private's voice was small. "Sergeant, did we win?" Mercer stared at the scorch marks on the pavement. He thought of Rains, thought of the civilians in the plaza, thought of the sterile corridor where mercy was obedience. He swallowed hard. "We survived," he said. The private nodded slowly. "Is that the same thing?" Mercer didn't answer right away. His throat felt tight. "No," he said finally. "But it's what we get." Across the planet, fires burned in places that used to be safe. Hospitals ran on generators. Families searched for names on lists. People held each other in silence because words were too small. In the diplomatic bunker, Ambassador Mara Cade faced a council transmission request. It wasn't a demand this time. It was an attempt at negotiation, frantic and shaky. Cade allowed the connection. Counselor Valsaran appeared on the screen. His smooth confidence was gone. His posture was still proud, but the pride looked like armor someone had forgotten to remove after it stopped working. "Earth," he said, translator crisp. "This conflict has exceeded acceptable parameters. The Council is prepared to discuss terms." Cade cut him off. Her voice was quiet, and that quiet was terrifying. "No," she said. Valsaran blinked. "You will refuse peace?" Cade leaned forward slightly. "We refused compliance," she said. "We refused your audit. We refused your sanitation clause. Peace was never yours to offer." Valsaran's jaw tightened. "What do you want, then?" he demanded. "Reparations? Territory? Influence? Your species has proven capable. You could join the Council as a—" Cade slid a document across the camera feed. Its text displayed in the Council's language as well as Earth's. It was one page, one clause. Any Council vessel entering Sol will be destroyed without communication. Valsaran stared at it as if it were a weapon pointed at his throat. "So you isolate yourselves?" he said, voice strained. "You withdraw from the galaxy." Cade's expression did not change. "No," she said. Valsaran's eyes narrowed. "Then what?" Cade's voice softened, not with kindness, but with certainty. "We remember," she said. The counselor's breathing hitched. "That is not policy," he whispered. Cade's gaze held him. "It is now," she said. The transmission ended. In the council capital, the damaged flagship limped into dock, its hull scarred and warped, its crew shaken into silence. The captain stood before the council chamber, surrounded by beings who had never imagined fear could reach them. A high council member demanded, "What do the humans want next?" The captain's voice was hollow. "They don't want anything," it said. The chamber rippled with confusion. "Explain." The captain's eyes were distant, fixed on something only it could see. "They did not ask for tribute," it said. "They did not demand surrender. They did not claim our worlds. They did not seek to rule. The captain swallowed, and the sound was loud in the quiet chamber. They simply stopped us, it said. And then they let us leave. The council member's voice rose. That is mercy. The captain shook its head slowly. No, it said. Mercy is what they offered first. The chamber went still. The captain's voice dropped into a whisper that carried like a knife. This is what they become when mercy fails. Far from Earth, in the dark between stars, unmarked objects drifted in silence. They were not fleets. They were not invasions. They were patient, cold instruments of deterrence, placed like mines in the imagination of anyone who might consider Seoul a target again. They didn't move fast. They didn't need to. They were not a threat that shouted. They were a consequence that waited. And on Earth, beneath smoke-stained skies, General Ward stood alone in his office and listened to the quiet of a world that had survived by doing something it could never take back. He looked at the empty space where Beacon 9 had once been, now just a blank patch of orbit, and he spoke to no one. We warned you, he said softly. You stayed. Outside, the sun rose like it always had. But the galaxy would never see it the same way again.